Next, we're going to welcome Linda Murch. She's the New England Field Coordinator for the Alliance for American Manufacturing.
They have copies. If I could alert you to the fact that Ms. Murch has provided written testimony starting on page 5, handwritten page 5, and there's also a letter that I believe the president of your organization sent to USTR, Michael Froman, on handwritten page 9.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Senator Volk, Representative Saucier, and members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Trade agreements can have a serious impact on Maine's manufacturers and workers, which is why getting trade right is of the utmost importance for the people of Maine. My name is Linda Murch. I was born and raised in Maine and currently live in Bangor. I worked for over 25 years in manufacturing facilities here in Maine. Most of my career was spent in the Bucksport paper mill, which sadly closed in December 2014, costing the state 500 good-paying jobs. Today I work for the Alliance for American Manufacturing because I care about keeping manufacturing jobs here in America, and because I know what it is like to build a life and a community through manufacturing. The Alliance for American Manufacturing is a nonprofit, nonpartisan partnership formed in 2007 by some of America's leading manufacturers and the United Steelworkers. Our mission is to strengthen American manufacturing and create new private sector jobs through smart public policies. As recently as 1998, 1 in 5 American workers worked in manufacturing. But since that time, our nation lost 5.7 million good-paying manufacturing jobs. Here in Maine, we have not been spared. Maine lost 31,000 manufacturing jobs, or 5.5% of all employment over that time. Today, 8% of Maine's workforce is employed in manufacturing, and manufacturing punches above its weight in terms of economic impact, accounting for 10.36% of the state's economic activity. If we want to maintain and grow Maine's manufacturing sector, we need to make sure that trade agreements reflect and enforce our economic values. Right now, the United States is negotiating 2 major trade agreements, the TPP and the TTIP. I would like to briefly outline AAM's perspective on how these agreements can ensure a brighter future for American manufacturing and workers. Trade enforcement. Manufacturers and workers harmed by unfair trade should not have to wait for layoffs before taking action. Legislation passed by Congress and signed into law this year updates our trade laws to allow the U.S. government to more effectively hold trade cheats accountable. Through any trade agreements, we must support strong domestic trade enforcement as the central mechanism for holding our trading partners accountable. Currency manipulation. Some countries manipulate their currencies to get a trade advantage. When they do this, U.S. goods become relatively more expensive, both at home and abroad. AAM urges the United States government to establish enforceable rules in the TPP to deter currency manipulation. Both Malaysia and Japan have engaged in this practice in recent years. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that ending currency manipulation could create as many as 24,000 Maine jobs and up to 5.8 million jobs nationally. Market access. Many tariff and non-tariff barriers prevent American-made products from making their way into markets in the Asia-Pacific. For example, Japan sold over 5.3 million cars in the U.S. in 2012, yet the Big Three sold fewer than 14,000 cars in Japan. For U.S. manufacturers to get value out of the TPP, we must remove barriers that keep American-made goods from being sold abroad. Rules of origin determine the national source of a product. This matters in trade deals because only those countries bearing the risks and responsibilities of signing an agreement should receive its benefits. Without strong rules of origin, it is possible to evade trade laws by obscuring the true source of a manufactured product. competition, and state-owned enterprises, American producers can compete with private companies anywhere, but not with foreign governments. State-owned enterprises in countries such as China benefit from subsidies like low-cost loans, rent-free land, cheap energy, and other supports unavailable to American producers. Trade agreements should encourage market-oriented business practices and level the playing field for American manufacturers. Government procurement and investment. 91% of American voters support Buy America preferences for taxpayer-funded projects. They want their dollars to be reinvested back in the American economy. By maximizing the domestic content of infrastructure projects, we can create 33% more jobs than by allowing the production to be outsourced. Trade agreements should continue to recognize that domestic procurement, be it for national security or transportation, can rightfully be used to support domestic manufacturing supply chains. Maine needs manufacturing. That is why it is important to understand how these trade agreements impact our citizens. With these measures in mind, we can create a level playing field on which American manufacturers and workers can compete fairly. I want to thank you again for allowing me to testify here today, and I look forward to your questions. And I won't read the letter due to the time constraints, but it is included in your packet.
Thank you so much, Linda. Any questions?
Question.
Representative Saucier.
Thank you. Linda, when we talk about manufacturing overseas, like automobiles, the United States had quotas on importing vehicles, but then countries like Japan and Korea would set up shop here in the United States and get around those quotas. Do we have any companies, any American-made car companies in overseas where they're building in them over there, or are we just shipping them over by quota? Do you know?
No, I don't, but I will check with our analysts and researchers in DC and get that back to you.
Yeah, because I know, like, I think it's in Tennessee or North Carolina where they're setting up, Mercedes and Volkswagen and Honda, and all these companies are manufacturing cars and employing Americans over here, and they're not importing, they're made here, so that they're getting around all those quotas. But 14,000 versus 5.2 million sounds rather skewed.
Yes. And with our statistics, because we're not against foreign companies producing here in the U.S. as long as it's providing American jobs. So we don't discriminate between the numbers on that. That is strictly us trying to sell over there.
Okay.
Senator Patrick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, in the numbers quoted, 5.3 million cars sold, Japan sold. Within that figure, is part of that 5.3 million, do you know, like the Toyotas and the Hondas that are made right here in America? Or are these 5.3?
No, those are strictly imported.
Imported.
We did not count anything produced in America.
Okay. So, in fact, Japanese vehicles, the number is actually way more than that, but it's 5.3 million imported from Japan.
Right, the ones that actually come over on the shipping containers.
And the other thing that I would say is within your presentation, the competition state-owned enterprises, one of the things that I think is anti-competitive for Americans is a lot of countries and companies have no environmental regulations at all, which in fact there are other elements that put us at a disadvantage that if we don't negotiate those into the trade agreements to try to bring that fair and balanced approach to everything, that it's hard for Americans to compete with the trade agreements as they are without addressing the competitiveness with no environmental regulations and other things and stuff like that. But
Yeah, my second manufacturing job was at the Lumforder Corporation in Brewer, and I had left there to go to the mill, but my sister was still employed there when they shut down several years ago. And they sent her to Mexico because that's where they moved the operation. And she said, you know, the water was dumped out back into the ditch. There was no environmental, no safety standards. A lot of the workers would come in barefoot. And you can't compete with that. So you're right. We need those regulations in the agreements we sign, but we also have to make them enforceable.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Whittemore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I sit here over the years watching a lot of our manufacturing go overseas, do you have any data in regards to cost of labor? What impact that has had had that vacuuming effect of a lot of our manufacturing going overseas?
I will get that to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Locke?
Could I ask a few?
Sure.
Okay. It isn't really addressed, I don't think, within your testimony, but, and I know it might be difficult to state because we really don't know what the TPP or TTIP consists of yet. It's largely unknown except for leaked texts, which have to still be finally negotiated. But in general, is your organization, the Alliance for American Manufacturing, in favor of these trade agreements, or are you waiting to see what they are actually consist of?
Because of the makeup of our partnership, we don't take a stance on a trade agreement as a whole.
I see.
We deal with, I'm not sure how much you're aware of our background, but we are a labor management group. So we have several large domestic manufacturers and one labor union. So, for example, currency manipulation, customs enforcement, that's something that we have in common. But we don't just rubber stamp a trade agreement. It has to be the pieces that fit for our partners.
So is it fair to say that the AAM is not necessarily against free trade agreements? Is that fair to say, or?
Against trade agreements. I would take out the free because we support fair trade agreements, where we're on a level playing field with our partners in these trade agreements. And so far, we haven't seen a lot of that. For example, with currency manipulation, the current administration has had 13 opportunities to label China as a currency manipulator and has refused to. And currency manipulation being one of our big issues, we have a problem with that.
So is it fair to say then that you have particular stances on elements of these
Yes.
different free trade agreements?
Yes.
Does your organization have a viewpoint on ISDS, investor state dispute
No.
resolution? Okay, because that's been one of the primary topics that this commission has been involved in over the years. And, I can see based on what you said that ISDS wouldn't necessarily be a prime concern of yours.
Right.
But
Representative Saucier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Linda, do you believe Canada's manipulating the currency right now, or is it because the American dollar is just so strong? I guess I don't understand, because I see, you know, less than a year ago, I think the dollar was even with the U.S. dollar. Now it's 30%. I mean, it seems kind of a large swing. Is it manipulation going on, you think, or is it just because the United States dollar is just doing so well?
I would say right off the cuff, I don't believe Canada manipulates to the extent that, because all countries do in a small way, but I don't believe Canada is one of the egregious violators. But I will check on that.
I guess the reason why I'm asking, because I do a food business in the summertime, and I normally get a lot of Canadians coming over, but they aren't coming. And it's almost like as if they are manipulating currency, they're trying to keep the money being spent inside their country and not spending outside. I mean, that could be happening anywhere, but I mean, I'm just so, you know, used to Northern Maine, how we have trading with Canada.
Right.
But is it happening like in Mexico and other countries?
The other countries we generally hear about would be China and some of the other Asian countries, not as much as China. And I know it's felt in AAM that if China was held to the standards that we have in play now, that the other countries wouldn't manipulate so much, but they tend to follow. You know, if China's doing it and getting away with it, Vietnam's going to do it, you know, as a model of business.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? None? Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. We have several publications that AAM has had put out. We generally contract with, for example, Duke University or the EPI, and I was just wondering if anybody would like copies of those. We have one on transportation, one on the national security defense supply chain, and general manufacturing one that I could make available if people would like a copy.
Are they electronic?
Some are on our website, and then there are hard copies.
I'd suggest maybe running them through Locke. He puts together relevant articles for us, and that's actually going to be the next part of our meeting, so that might be something that he would want to share with us at the next meeting.
Thank you again for allowing me to testify.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.